Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This edition to Insider's Guide to Energy is brought to you by Fidectis. Go to www.fidectis.com for more information.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me as always is co-host Johan Oberg. Johan, how's it going today?
I am very good, Chris. Sitting in an ice cold office. I think the heating is not being kept up with the weather. The first snow came into Switzerland last night, and it's a little bit chilly, to say the least.
Yeah, it's great to see the winter. My kids were super excited with the snow. Even when there was more grass and snow, my son was out in the backyard building a ski jump. And so now there's some YouTube videos of him jumping mostly on grass, but doing some jumps with his little brother as the cameraman. So it was quite an evening last night watching the early skiing in our backyard.
I bet it's fantastic. We're lucky to be in one of the best places for winter as well. But it always rings a little bit of the warning bells when I read the Swedish news and some of the other European news as well, especially do we want a long, cold winter in Europe, especially on the topic that we're on to now in terms of the energy supply. We'll see where this is, but it's for some of us looking forward to a really nice winter. I guess some others are not.
I'm looking forward to snow and skiing. I am not looking forward to what's anticipated in the markets and the energy prices. And I think if you're into the renewable scene, there's been a little bit of a setback through COVID as to burning more coal and some other hydrocarbons that perhaps would not have been burned had we not be in the current state we're in today. But anyway, I'd rather be skiing than not. So I'll take the cold any day of the week.
I agree.
But we're going to talk about things that have to do with solar today. So we're going to, hopefully your solar panels aren't buried under 6 inches of snow today. And if they are, hopefully you've got a good strategy to clean them off. We've got a really interesting concept, our guests that we're going to talk to. And it really does manage the lifestyle or understand in solar how to get the most out of it, right? So you put your big PV park in, you got all this happening. And what happens and how do you do that? And the guest we have today has got some technology. They use AI, they use drones, they use all kinds of exciting things to help manage this process. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. What are you thinking about for today?
No, but I agree with you, Chris. And I think this is also one of the reasons we kind of, or at least I jumped on the show, was to see the combination here. We see the energy transition towards renewable with wind and solar, of course, and the technology that are driving it. You have buzzwords like AI and all the rest, and see how that actually is put into place is always what I'm fascinated. The buzzwords are one thing, but the actual day-to-day, how it works, is be interesting to hear.
Well, we can up the podcast for our listeners that every time we use a buzzword, you'd have to do a shot if you'd like. We could make it like watching football or something like that.
That could be an interesting concept.
We could make this a much more interesting show. And by the end of the show, it might be more entertaining as well.
That could be the Christmas episode. Who knows? No, but I think it's going to be great. And I also like to hear the story around it. I come from the corporate world. You're in the startup world. I'm always fascinating to hear more from the startups and to see how they work together and teamwork in the ecosystems. And I have a few questions around this as well. So I'm really excited.
Well, without further ado, yeah, it's the holiday season, so we might have to revisit our policies here. Yeah. But without further ado, let's get into the show. Let's meet our guest and find out more. So who we have with us today is Nikhil Vadhavkar. Nikhil is at a company called Raptor Maps. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I was just thinking, if people start to play the buzzword drinking game, they don't want to hit the ski slopes afterward. you start your après ski, beforehand.
You obviously have not skied in Austria because they party like rock stars on the mountains. I'd have to say, a lot of fun, but yeah, I don't want to be downhill if you've been doing shots beforehand. So I introduced your company name as Raptor Maps. But we're going to talk about solar and all kinds of stuff. So what is Raptor Maps?
Yeah, so Raptor Maps we're a software company focused exclusively on the solar industry, and what we do is we manage the solar life cycle for our customers, and we enable the solar industry to scale. And so, if you think about kind of the big trends in climate and what do we need to do to remove, 5 gigatons of carbon on an annual basis, solar is basically tasked with those 5 gigatons by 2050 by the international community. And what that's going to require is a lot more money going into solar, a lot more PV plants that are going to be built, a lot more management that has to occur. And all of these things need to be done much more efficiently than they're being done today to even have a shot of making that a reality.
Okay, so you manage life cycle. Maybe more specifically, what does that mean? Because that's a lot of description, and I can't on what you do yet.
All right, so let's say you're a PV system owner. You have a certain financial model. So, like it or not, no matter how passionate you are about renewables, it has to make financial sense. And so you have a certain rate of return, just like, if any of our listeners here, you might put something into something really risky and, it might provide a great return, or something that's really stable, it might provide a less of a return. The same thing happens in PV. And so everyone is trying to maximize their returns. And why this has become more and more important is back in the day when you had very high subsidies, high what we call power purchase agreement rates and things like that, there was a lot more room, there was a lot more wiggle room, where even if you weren't managing your assets at peak efficiency, you're still going to make money, you're still going to make really good money. Now that's no longer the case. So as solar has come down the cost curve, little differences in power production make very big differences in the return profile. And so that's one thing that we help our customers do, is find, how can we automatically make sure that these plants are running at peak performance so that they're delivering what is necessary to generate the returns that are needed in order to keep this entire flywheel spinning. So that's really, when we think of life cycle management from an owner perspective, that's what we do. Now, you do have other players in solar, such as operators like O&M, as well as builders, or what we call EPC, and we can certainly get into their pain points and where life cycle management helps them as well.
So specifically, so you've got software. How are you engaged with the customer? So you do what over the life science? So if we engage Raptor Maps, what am I engaging you to do?
Yep. So there are two kind of main phases that Raptor Maps plays in. One is, during the development process, shortly before construction. So around, what we call NTP, or notice to proceed. And then the second kind of phase is an operational asset. And so no matter what, the first thing Raptor Maps does, if you engage with us in that process, is we're going to take either the blueprints for the site that you're about to build, or we're going to take the drawings, literally the electrical drawings, and how is everything wired up, and all of the components and everything that goes into that solar farm, and we're going to create a digital or virtual replica. So some people call this a digital twin. And that is very, very important, because that creates, think of it as the perfect blank template for us to layer in other types of data for our customers, so that when they log in, they can actually see, okay, I've got performance issues here, here, and here, and this is where I need to go to address them. So yeah, that's, we play in, pre-construction as well as energized systems. That's our sweet spot.
So you mentioned performance issues from an solar production site or a power site. That could be a number of things. So from constructions to maintenance to everything. What do you mean? Because this is interesting. As you said in the beginning, that you can maximize or make it even more efficient. Small changes can make a big return on the investment. But what are those performance issues, especially in the early days?
Yeah, so the best way to think about it is you have lots and lots of different types of risk. And the best way to maximize performance and maximize your return is to minimize risk. And so if you take an asset that is already, let's say it's already operational, you have a risk that maybe some of the components are not working properly, or maybe you have a risk that the solar farm is not being maintained to the level that it should be. And so when we talk about performance issues, specifically, we're talking about addressing these different types of risk. And so, and I'll give you some concrete examples. One is you may have issues with the inverter. Maybe maybe it's not matching properly with the underlying modules, and you need to adjust that. You might have issues with strings that are not working. You might have issues where vegetation is overgrown and covering the modules. You might have, we mentioned this at the beginning, you might have snow on your panels, right? So there can be a number of things. It might be environmental conditions. It might be maintenance practices. It might actually just be an underlying warranty condition that you have to go take up with your equipment manufacturer. And what Raptor Maps does is we enable our customers to detect that core underlying issue, and very importantly, communicate that to the other stakeholders that can actually resolve it, so that they can get that plant up and running where it needs to be.
So help me, and I apologize to be the slow one on the call here. So you create this digital twin. So you've got an ideal situation, or the optimized situation, what my equipment should and can do. And do I mirror that against the reality of the metrics and performance I'm seeing, or is it just a modeling tool to avoid problems? I guess help me understand how you use the digital twin.
Yeah, so to understand it, it's helpful to understand, okay, you've got this, this data model. How do you put data into it? And how do we populate it? And then what do we get out of it? So there are a few different types of data. The first one is equipment records. So for example, people will use our mobile application. We've had IPPs have 30 plus people simultaneously scanning serial numbers into the digital twin for every single module, automatically verifying that against their supply chain documentation, linking that back to how every single module tested in the factory, and then also confirming that that it's valid and things aren't duplicated and things like that. So that's one way in which we populate the data model. The second way is the time series data. So when we say time series data, the easy way to think about it as a listener is how much power is this part of a solar farm producing, and that's going to directly equate to how much money am I making. So it's basically all the different ways, or I guess all the different modules that roll up to the hierarchy up to the inverter level. We're modeling that. And then finally, there's the inspection data, or there's the underlying ground truth of what's going on. So you mentioned, drones, airplanes, things like that, like the actual underlying issues that we discussed earlier. And so when all of these come together, now we paint a very complete picture for an owner or an operator or builder of the status of that asset without having to physically be there. Because when you go into, when you log in and you click on a module, for example, everything about the history of that module, as well as how that module is connected electrically all the way up to the inverter level. And so this gives you total awareness of the state of your plant, but the data is structured in a way that we can automate the actual assessments of what's happening. So you don't actually have to go and click through every module. It's structured in a way that this is where computers can do it for you. And this is the heart of machine learning, is having really, really good training data.
So that's based on if I understand it correctly, so you have the modules, you can input it, as you said, manually, or scan them in. You have a profile and a kind of a total inventory of your hardware or your solar panels. And you can replicate that in the digital twin, and you can monitoring. But then we have the example of the snow. So obviously, or the wind, the vegetation you mentioned. This is real time. So suddenly now the input from a part of the solar park or specific panels comes down, and the issue is because something is blocking it in one way or the other. How does that work? Are you also doing? Is it camera driven? Is it drone driven? How do we know what's covering it, or what's was impacting?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So when we think about the data, we have, they're kind of two major buckets, right? Either you've got continuous data, such as the on-site sensors, like the weather stations, the power production, things like that, or you may have a snapshot in time, but it's extremely high resolution, and you're getting causation from that. Now, the magical moment is when you actually are able to combine the two and then use that really high quality underlying ground truth data taken at that moment to go back and train the model on how to respond or what you're seeing, during the times where you aren't doing an inspection. So exactly in that particular case. So for example, let's say you get snow on a module, and you're going to get, your curve is, your power output's going to be lower, right? And so but if all you knew is that the power output is lower, that can be due to one of many different things. But if you were able to label that because you've inspected snowy modules at some point, what that curve looks like when modules are snowy. You've labeled it in that underlying data model. Now you're actually starting to train an algorithm so that next time that happens, it doesn't need that underlying ground truth data. It can say, wait a minute, I've seen this several times before, and really match that pattern. And that, that's how we basically translate, what's going on at the ground truth level to continuous asset monitoring, 24/7, 365. Although I guess I would say maybe 8 to 12, 365. When the sun's down, it's down.
Yes. So I guess what I just heard you describe from machine learning capability is perhaps you would look at the weather module and say, okay, well, we know it's below 32 degrees and we see a gradual decrease in power coming in. And there's a number of elements that you might do for the machine to go, oh, this therefore is a snow event. And this is what I've learned it to be. Is it that kind of thing where you have multiple elements that you're looking at, and then you've learned it because you've seen it before and you can get a quick response? Is that kind of what you're saying in layman's terms?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what we've also found is that, it used to be 3-4 years ago, there was no, being a software developer for the solar industry like that was a pretty rare thing. But now what we're finding is we have customers that are, they're using our APIs and taking advantage of all the hooks that we've built into our software to bring in even more data that that we may not have even thought of before. So things like what you're saying, like the weather data and stuff like that, that's standardized for all of our customers. But then our customers may be combining that with other things and other sensors or other types of information, and even creating their own dashboards. And so that's been really exciting. Is so not only are we doing the machine learning, but we're enabling an entire developer ecosystem in solar.
So you bring up a point that I was going to get to later in the show, but since you've gone there already, I'm going to go there. Is, what did you do to wake up one day and decide that I was going to develop software in the solar industry? What problem statement did you identify as a founder and go, hey, this is revolutionary? What was it that made you do this?
That's a really good question. So we noticed that a lot of solar industry professionals we're a Y Combinator company. For those of you who don't know, it's this it's this incubator in Silicon Valley and all of that. But one of the things that is a really common phrase that everyone talks about is hacking. So you may have heard like growth hacking and things like that. So when I say hacking, I don't literally mean like getting into protected. But what we noticed was that in the solar industry, people were hacking around with different types of remote sensing. And what I mean by that is we literally saw field technicians buying $20,000 to $30,000 drones, going out there and literally just messing around with different thermal settings, different color imagery settings, different flight parameters, and things like that. And they were able to notice things. They were basically replacing these required, dull, dirty, dangerous tasks where you had to open up combiner boxes and wear arc flash suits and things like that. So they were like, wow, the quality of data that we're able to get from these new off-the-shelf, sensors is really good. We know that this can save us a lot of time and money and enable us to, increase the power production and make our customers happy, the asset owners. But they didn't have any software infrastructure to do it at scale. So when Raptor Maps got involved, it was actually through a pull from the industry where people were coming to us and saying, well, hey, you guys have really good experience building these data models. Can you build the data model for solar? And actually, when my co-founder and I took a look under the hood several years ago, we said, well, obviously, we can build a solution, and we'll just hook it into whatever the underlying system of record is for the solar industry. It's a new enough industry. There must be one. And when we looked under the hood, we were shocked, right? Because this whole industry was built by accountants and lawyers, and so it was all just paperwork and static drawings, and there was no underlying data model in which we could even start to create that blank canvas for a solar farm, let alone analyze the data that people were collecting in the field. And so we saw it as a huge opportunity where we said, hey, let's start with this remote sensing data because that's where the demand is, right? Everyone wants to inspect their solar farms. But very importantly, for every solar farm that people are submitting data for, we're going to create that underlying data model, and then we're going to layer it with the inspection results because that's going to enable us to automatically provide our customers access with either high level reports that they can send to banks, all the way down to the minutia that they can go dispatch, work with their independent engineers on, or go dispatch an individual truck and things like that. So that's what really got us into it, and that's when we said, wow, if the solar industry doesn't have this, it is not going to scale. And this is kind of a huge wake-up call for us. And so, this is our calling to enable, the tech risk in terms of modules and the equipment and all that has been solved. That's why the international community is relying on solar to be 20% of the solution to, offsetting carbon for, climate change by 2050. It really is all about the software to enable it to scale.
So where are we now? So that was the problem statement. That was the aha moment, if there was
Yep.
one. And so how long ago was that? And where are we now on the map, on the road?
Yeah, that was about 4 years ago. And where we are now is we've digitized over 4,200 utility scale and commercial and industrial PV systems in 40 different countries across 50 gigawatts. And so, it's been fantastic because it's enabled us to work with the largest owners, operators, and builders in the world. And they're all realizing, an ROI by using Raptor Maps. And what's really exciting is because we made it so it's a very lightweight engagement process where our customers can, even if they're, massive utilities, they can start with a handful of PV systems. We can onboard them very quickly and basically enable them to see for themselves. It kind of gets back to what we talked about earlier, like our life cycle management. What is it? How does it benefit me? There's so many ways that the best way to do it is to say, here, we'll hook it up for a handful of your assets, and we'll help you guys really understand the power behind it. And so that's where we are now. Everything we've talked about today is live, it's launched, and our customers can come and we can get them hooked up within days.
So talking about customers, if we go back, you mentioned also a little bit of investors. There was a financial modeling from lawyers and an investor. You have the people that own.
I didn't say for lawyers.
But who are your customers? This is a life cycle, as you mentioned. This is the whole life cycle of it. But who is your normal or your standard customers? Is it the owners of the actual plant? Is it some maintenance companies, or how does it work? Who buys the product?
Yeah, great question. So what typically happens is that the customer will either be the asset owner or developer directly, just depends on the stage of that particular plant. Or what we found is that they may be searching for a solution, and then they'll have either the builder, the EPC, or the O&M source and implement that solution. So for example, what we did recently, we had a press release on that with Rosendale Electric. They actually were required by the utility to find a solution to scan in the serial numbers, to validate the supply chain paperwork, to prove installation. And so we were able to work with both them as well as the utility to implement this solution on a PV system that had 1 million modules. And so It's always a combination of either selling both to the the developer / the EPC or the owner / the operator, because they both have a lot of skin in the game. Now, where it gets very interesting and where we consider Raptor Maps a platform where different counterparties are working together, is that we've noticed that for every PV plant represented in our system, the data owner will share that with 20 other people. And many of those people are outside of their organization. So it's typically going to be their counterparty. So if it's an O&M, for example, they're authorizing the owner on that particular PV system. They might be authorizing the independent engineer. They might be authorizing the module manufacturer because they want them to take a look at it for a warranty claim. And where we've really shifted the paradigm within the solar industry is, instead of people compiling reports and sending emails and Excel models and things like that, they're instead just authorizing their counterparties to come in, and they can go as high level or as granular as they want in order to get the information they need at exactly the level they need it.
So that brings up something that's interesting to me. You said you had 4,000 plus customers today, I think is what I heard you say.
I said PV plants, so obviously
PV plants, okay. Okay, but that's fine. But the same, where my question was going is, at some point you have 4 years of experience. You're developing a corpus of data for big data tools that you'll be able to use in the future. Is that part of what you're doing now? Have you got enough data size and sample to do interesting things, or are these all silos of data that you can't normalize or take away the ownership and use for some more interesting things perhaps from all that data?
Yeah, so one of the things that our customers can already do, and this, you hit upon the benefits of a highly structured data model, is we have a benchmarking dashboard where they can go in and they can see, how is my portfolio doing against the global data set? Do I have more severe cell issues, or do I have more vegetation than the average? The other thing they can do is they can actually compare the performance of their particular modules of a certain brand against the global data set's performance of that brand. Now we can go, we can enable them to go much more granular, but we want to make it so that it's aggregated and anonymized, and that's really where we draw the line for our customers, where they can, it's a give to get. So you're going to get all the benefits of the data that you put in, but we're very careful to make sure nothing is identifiable back to any one particular customer. But to your
point, are they all signing up for that? Are they willing to share their data for anonymous data back? Is that universally accepted from your customers?
Yes, exactly.
And is that a requirement to be on your system?
Yes, it is. So when you put in, so a key part of that underlying data model is that you are putting in the balance of system components as well as the make and model of the individual modules. And that's what enables us to, for us, it's also about the customer experience, right? So we want our customers to be able to, if you've got, Trina modules or First Solar or Jinko or whatever it may be, you should be able to benchmark that against the global data set. But you bring up another good point, which is, what do you do with this corpus of data in the future? And for us, it comes down to, thinking about risk and elements of risk. So for example, there's no S&P today, there's no Moody's for the solar industry. And that kind of lack of a universal rating actually can create a lot of issues when you think about the amount of capital that needs to be deployed into the solar industry at scale. And the amount of M&A that we're seeing today, even though there's a flurry of activity, is nothing compared to where it's going. And so this is the type of data that helps inform, people when they're transacting, how risky is a particular investment, both one that might already be, installed and producing, but also one that might be under consideration. It might be a good way, for example, to inform customers if they need to tweak the components that make up a potential PV system that they're contemplating building, because it's going to be less risky than what they've already got on paper.
So looking at this, I think the data model is always interesting. The challenge is always to monetize on the data that you have. You can always collect a lot of data separate from your actual business model. But you should also have an opportunity here to do brand comparison, as we were touching on a little bit. So do you get any questions before from people that are looking to invest in solar, saying, listen, you sit on all the data, you know what the best brands is, you know what to how to optimize the site, you know where the weather should be, you know who's the best, etc. What is the return on investment? Are you also kind of advising in the beginning of this, or are you more engaging with your customer once it's decided and the plant is up?
Yeah, so there's a lot more. It just comes down to roadmap and focus. So we are a startup, right? So we've got limited resources, and what we found the best bang for our buck is to help our customers today. Is I'll give you a good example. When we, by combining the on-site sensor data with the inspection data, that enables us to create a very high quality data set that is that enables you to go put in a warranty claim, for example. And that enables better engagement with the module manufacturers. And so our focus today, when you think about monetizing, is as we work with our customers, we're seeing more and more use cases for combining this structured data and creating these outputs that are generating an immediate ROI. And so, because we are that trusted brand and that third party, that is where we're putting all of our focus today, as opposed to doing kind of advising services for developers, because, we're just as trusted by the owners and operators as we are by the, module manufacturers and other counterparties. So, we have to be extremely careful with how we use that data set and maintain that privileged and trusted position.
Very cool. So maybe you could share a success story or a story of something that you've done. So let's go to a real world example. So take me back to one of your customers that you've helped and what you've done to impact their business and what kind of magnitude it had on the business by engaging you guys.
Yeah, so I'll give you one specific example, and I'll kind of give you a global example with numbers, because it comes down to what we were talking about with data privacy earlier. So what we modeled, and some of our customers have seen much more benefit than this, is if you look at a typical PV system, and we've published this report, on average, you're going to see about 1.8% of capacity of that PV system that can be restored. So top line revenue that you can pretty easily get back if you're an owner. And the implication for that is an IRR, or rate of return, of over 100 basis points. And for a PV system that may only be producing kind of in the high single digit rate of return, that's huge. And so that is the type of quantitative win that our customers are seeing over and over and over again. I'll give you a practical example, going back to the one earlier. So imagine you're building a PV system. You want to be able to measure the rate of installation of modules. You want to know kind of how fast are they being installed. You want to know when they're being installed, where they're being installed, and kind of trace every single module all the way back to the factory. And the reason you want to do that is, A, you want to make sure your modules are ethically sourced. B, you want to make sure that your construction company is actually installing them in the manner in which you think. If you're the construction company, you want to prove you installed these modules because you want to get paid, so you have to compile this documentation anyway. If you are, this asset's going to operate for 25 years, you're going to have to go collect, equipment record data at some point if you ever want to put in a warranty claim or even make some assessment about this asset. And so one big win, or several big wins now that we've had, are companies that are scanning serial numbers into the digital twin in parallel, where we'll have, I think recently we had 30 people scanning in parallel, verifying that supply chain documentation, proving installation. We had a dashboard that was literally showing on an hour by hour basis the progress of the different crews. And then that underlying data model was being maintained by the operations and maintenance company going forward, so that when they were swapping out modules or if they were making some sort of assessment on a particular module, they already had the ability to pull up the records of that module, but they also had the ability to change it out in the digital twin to maintain that digital twin. And then what was really interesting there is that there's this problem, and this is probably a little too technical for the listeners, but I'm going to give it to you anyway because I think your listeners are really smart. There's the EPC, what we call EPC to O&M, and this really just means like, all right, I built it. It's not really my problem anymore, and I'm handing it off to the operator. And whatever the operator gets, I mean, yeah, there's a certain checklist of paperwork, but it's like whatever you get, you get. And all of a sudden, as the operator, you're like, all right, you're responsible for the performance of the solar farm. But, how do you know it was built to a certain spec? And even if it was, you want the best, most structured data. You want to give yourself a running start, right? You don't want to, have one hand tied behind your back right away. And so what all of this enabled us to do was, instead of having a huge docket of paperwork for the EPC to O&M handoff, it was literally as simple as authorizing the correct party in the software platform to basically be like, okay, you are now the stewards of this digital twin going forward. So it was a huge shift in how we think about that transfer process as well.
So the contractors bought onto the model then that you basically can use your tool as the validation of what's good enough, I guess is what I'm hearing, right? So
Yeah. So one of the things there are a few things people don't realize with the contractors. One is they in turn have a lot of contractors. So they actually have to, verify their subcontractors and so on and so forth, all the way down. And the second is that they need this documentation in order to get paid. And then third is that they're still on the hook for at least a little while for any issues that may occur. And so by collecting this data in this manner, they're also able to either, if something is wrong, address it quickly while they still actually have people on site, because it's very expensive to remobilize people. But two, if it's an issue with the factory, or maybe it was an issue with shipping, this enables them to prove that and basically say, hey, this is going to be a really costly issue, but we didn't do it. So it gives them the ability to defend themselves. And so, those are a lot of the reasons why contractors are bought on as well.
Do they have a different interface or dashboard that they go to, or is everybody just using APIs into other systems? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah. So they're all using our mobile application. So when you scan in, because we have that underlying digital twin that we talked about at the beginning of the show, as you are scanning modules, it's automatically advancing and showing you where are you relative to, where's your position relative to the PV system, which module are you on, which one are you scanned into, all of that. So they're using our software in the field. Yep. And then they all have the same level of access. Now the owners can choose when we layer in. So we'll typically layer in the results from the commissioning inspection. That is typically shared between the owners and the EPCs, but the owners they can choose whether or not they want to expose that data. So whoever the data owner is, they can tweak the permissions. You can do things like, hey, you can only put data in, but you can't see it or take it out, things like that. So.
Cool.
Interesting. Yeah. Go on, Chris.
So I guess the other thing that came to mind when you're talking about the life cycle of, let's say, the component. So you talked about sourcing, and that's always important because there's been a lot of news about solar panel sourcing and things like that. So that would be an important initiative. What about post-project? What about recycling and where the panels go? Is that part of the platform already, or is that something in the future that you look at? So, for example, like wind blades, turbine blades, they finally figured out how to have a path for them to go gracefully into the night, right? And become something else. What about solar panels? Is that path happen in the solar industry, or is it trending that way?
Yeah, you hit upon there are kind of two questions in there, because one is, these assets on paper are typically about 25 years, but what's happening is, if you ask most experts, they're going to tell you, well, these assets are going to go for a lot longer, but the big asterisk is they might end up being repowered. And when that happens, you may very well be stripping out, old modules and putting in, newer, more efficient ones, as well as other components. And then the question is, well, what happens to that? And, who's responsible for that? And so the same traceability protocols, to your point, that are necessary to trace modules, from the factory all the way to installation, are going to be the ones that are used. You're just going to you're going to do it the opposite way, right? So you're going to scan the modules first, and then you're going to, start, moving them where they need to be in order to recycle them. And you're going to have to prove that And if you don't, you'll prove it, or if you're going to have to pay a penalty. I think it's going to be a lot like tax credits or things like that. So yeah, it's no different than if you put your old appliance out on the street. You got to have that sticker that proves you paid you actually paid for the people to haul it away. Same deal in the solar industry.
Makes sense.
So just coming back a little bit to the projects, and we're seeing throughout through the energy transformation around solar, from the big solar parks, probably a lot in the US and other parts of the world, some less maybe in where I come from the Nordics, where the sun doesn't shine as often. But in terms of Raptor Maps and the software and the digital twin, in order to maximize this, is there a size limit? Is there a volume here where we say, you are a factory with a few number of solar panels, probably not worth the while? Or so would you address a certain kind of customers to a certain volume, or is it for anyone, even for your household? Maybe not for your household, but from factories, kind of a thing, or is it made for industrial size?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So our sweet spot is actually commercial and industrial, all the way up to utility scale. And so even a few hundred kilowatts is absolutely worth it. So the only area of solar that, and it's actually not a software question for us. It's more of, there's certain types of data and sensors on site and inspections, and there's kind of a certain threshold there that, you get a real step change in value. And that tends to happen starting at the CNI level, the commercial and industrial level. Okay. So for those of you listeners who want a visual, think of things like, business rooftops, carports, universities, distribution centers, and then all the way up to, the monster, solar farms that you're going to see in the desert. That's commercial all the way up to utility scale.
So there are kind of some rule of thumbs that have developed over your years of experience as to, what percentage you save, or, but not using your technology, or by doing it maybe how they were doing it before your company existed. Because you've got to go out and you're pitching them, right? You're saying, hey, we're gonna help you manage this whole thing. So what kind of rules of thumbs, what kind of ROIs are your investors looking for, or your customers looking for, actually, more appropriately?
So typically, and this is kind of your like entry level, Raptor Maps engagement. We're seeing ROIs around $2,000 a megawatt. It's dependent on the power purchase agreement, right? So it was funny. I was talking with an owner the other day, and they basically said they had a really small site that was like $100 a megawatt hour PPA, and then a really big site that was at like 25, and they baby this $100 site for obvious reasons. So that number can actually, that ROI can actually be significantly higher. Now, where it gets interesting is that if you've got two different parties, they might be seeing different types of benefit, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? So the owners are typically going to see the upside from any increase in the IRR of the project, or NPV, stuff like that. And then the operators are typically going to see the value when it comes to meeting their service level agreements, closing new business, including convincing owners and other counterparties of necessary non-covered services that increases their top line revenue. They're much more efficient with their workforce, where, because there are labor shortages, people are expensive, these sites are spread out geographically, all these. So yeah, if you want a job in solar, you can get one. It's a really good time. There's a pretty big shortage. And then, finally, it helps them. It actually helps them prove, going back to what we were talking about earlier, prove that there's certain times when action and expensive action doesn't make sense. So it's actually really helpful if you have a fully auditable data model for an operator to say, hey, I've got these really low level cell defects on, 0.3% of my modules, and they're all sub 5 degrees Celsius temperature delta. And I scanned it again a year later, and that didn't really change. don't go roll trucks for that, right? Like, it doesn't help them, it doesn't help the owner. It's not really doing anything. And so that's where that quality of data and that auditability of data helps them use their resources very effectively. And it also helps their performance engineers. These are really smart, college educated people. They went to school to optimize solar farms. They don't want to sort and wade through data and normalize and standard. They want to put their brains to good use. They want to actually go in with high quality data and fix the underlying issue.
Johan, do you have any final questions as we're reaching the end of the show here? What final questions might you want to ask?
Well, I think, first of all, I really enjoyed it, and I'm still trying to get my head around all of how it works and all the technology around it. But I think I have, and I thought it was really good. But one of the things that I was also fascinating, I did some research before the show on you, and there was some mention about the Greentown Labs. And being a member of this and the ecosystem around it. And I'm not really sure if everyone knows what it is. It was fairly new to me. But how do you see the value in terms of being the startup company that you are, focusing, of course, on this one, but also being, if I understand it correctly, part of a kind of a bigger circle of renewable companies to support?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who aren't familiar, exactly as described, Greentown Labs is it's a climate tech or clean tech incubator. And where, there are several benefits for us. This really, really helped Raptor Maps take off. And the reason for that is that it's very easy, even within climate tech, to get siloed on your specific problem within your specific niche of, because even though our software covers a large part of the solar life cycle, there are other companies at Greentown Labs that are working on solar plus storage. There are companies that are working on deploying solutions off grid. There are companies that are working on charge control. So even like within solar, there's so many companies, and then obviously there's the broader, we have EV companies and you name it. And so being part of that ecosystem has helped us stay abreast of what are the big trends and what are we all working towards, and what does the actual future look like in terms of climate and renewables. And then two, it's just invigorating being around other entrepreneurs that have the same global mission that you do. And I think even for our employees, as great of a culture as we have, having exposure outside of what the Raptor Maps bubble, I think, and that diversity makes us a lot stronger as well. And then practically, of course, because we have hundreds of companies that are all part of this kind of one umbrella organization, there's certainly efficiencies that, when it comes to, hey, I want to speak with the head of innovation here or the director of asset management here or something like that. That brand and the people who run Greentown have just a phenomenal reputation that either they can make it happen, or increasingly it's our colleagues that we've met that are really helping open doors for us, and vice versa.
Well, cool. So I guess the one final question I have, so in 4 years of doing this, what is the one unexpected thing, or what have you learned? What was the biggest challenge, perhaps, type of thing that happened in the past 4 years that you didn't think about beforehand, that became a problem that you've overcome or still working through?
Yeah. So the first one that comes to mind, at Google, they have a process called dog fooding, where it's, your own engineers are using your software, your own employees, before you release it to the broader public. And we believe in this heavily at Raptor Maps. So we will, our employees will go out to solar farms, and we didn't realize, we were talking with an asset owner. They said, yeah, come on site. And then a few weeks beforehand, we were going through all the safety paperwork, and we were reading about all the snakes and how you had to have snake traps. So we literally had to equip our employees with like anti-rattlesnake, gear and heavy boots and, safety protocols and all that. I would never have thought I'd be sending, project managers and software engineers into rattlesnake territory 4 years ago. But luckily, I think we had a couple sightings, but everyone came out the other side with their skin intact.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think I have a bit more of a feel. I don't know that I could say I could 100% nail everything you do. It sounds like you offer quite a bit and you're continuing to evolve. but I really did enjoy finding out more about the solar life cycle and what solutions you bring and how you help solve problems for your customers. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Great conversation, and yeah, everyone go hit the slopes.
Yeah, looking forward to snow. For our audience, once again, you spent another hour listening to Insider's Guide to Energy. If you've enjoyed this show, please remember to share it with your friends. Don't forget to hit that like button and never forget to subscribe. We look forward to talking to you again next week. Thank you.